Our next presenter is Denise Silfee. She is the Director of Education and Communications at the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. Denise is here to explain the correlation of loons and lead and the effects that has. And if that's not interesting enough, Denise has served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand, and she hiked the Appalachian Trail. So I think that's pretty cool. Here's Denise.
Okay, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to apologize right away because I definitely am going to make you late for lunch. So I'm going to try to talk real quick. So I'm really happy to be here. Again, I am the relatively new Director of Education and Communications at the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation, located in beautiful downtown, there you go, Saranac Lake. Our mission is to inspire a passion for and the conservation of Adirondack loons as environmental sentinels. And we do that through our research, conservation, and educational outreach measures. Some of the things that make loons such great research subjects, and the reason that we focus all of our efforts on them, include the fact that they are long-lived. Loons live to be about 30 to 40 years, so we can track them over, hopefully, decades of their lives. They are also, when they are here in the Adirondacks or in the Adirondacks, for their nesting season, they are extremely territorial. They practice nesting site fidelity, which means that they return to the same nesting places year after year. If they can, they would choose to go back to the same nesting site for their entire lives. Reasons why that might not be possible include that they can be displaced by another territorial pair, or if something happens to their nesting site, like shoreline development where it becomes unsuitable, then they might move on. But they would prefer to stay in the same place every single year of their lives. And this is great for research because we can reliably predict which pairs will go where, and again, we can just continue to follow them over the course of their lives. Loons also rely on water. They spend their entire lives either on the surface or under the surface of the water. They cannot walk on land, so if you see a loon on land, that is a loon in distress. Please give us a call. It does not belong there. The way that their legs are positioned on the back of their body, it makes them incredibly, they're adapted for swimming, for diving and swimming in the lake. So it's great for diving, chasing fish for prey or to eat, but they are not conducive to walking on land. The only time loons will go on land is to nest. So that's why they build their nests about 2 inches off the lake shore so that they can awkwardly flop onto their nest and then awkwardly flop back. So once again, if you see a loon anywhere on land, give us a call. That loon is in distress. This also means, or because loons are so adapted to water, they have heavier and denser bones than other birds to help them stay underwater for long periods of time, which means that they need a very long runway of open water to take flight. They will run across the surface of the water with their legs, and they will flap their wings continuously for about a quarter mile before they're able to take flight. So this is why if you also see a loon in a small river, that is also a loon in distress, because it probably can't take off. So because loons rely on water, we use them as research subjects to understand our Adirondack Lake ecosystems. They are the top predators in the lake. There's not a lot of predators that prey on adult loons, but loons will prey on anything in the lake. This means that they will accumulate anything that is affecting any of the fish or the prey organisms in the lake, and we can see the effects of that in the loon's body, all of which makes them excellent biological indicators of lake health. When we capture loons, we take blood and feather samples, and in those blood and feather samples, we can measure the presence of environmental pollutants like mercury and increasingly PFAS, or forever chemicals. So as a water-based bird that lives for quite a long time, they're great for researching and understanding how our lake health is changing over time. They are also a species of special concern in New York. So the state of New York has designated them as like a special species that deserves protection because of their status as a biological indicator, and because we like them, which is, my last reason for why we work with loons. They are culturally important. They are symbols of wilderness, symbols of wildness. We kind of associate them with a way of life, and a way of humans being able to live closely with wildlife. So for that reason, they're important, and we want to keep them here for generations to come. So our main research, the research that the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation was founded on, is mercury research. So our founder, Dr. Nina Schock, started doing research on mercury as an environmental pollutant by studying loons back in 1998, and has continued to contribute to our understanding of the presence of mercury in the Adirondacks. And again, we do that by capturing the loons. Every summer, we have a loon banding week where researchers and volunteers go out and they capture the loons. They take the blood and feather samples that we send out to our partners to get analyzed. And we also band them with colorful bands. Each color combination is unique to that individual bird. So that is how then we can kind of watch them over the course of their lives. Right now there are over 500 banded loons in the Adirondack Park. And we have people all over that send us reports when they see those individual birds, so we can kind of see where they go when they migrate. Usually it's the coast. Sometimes it's as close as New Hampshire. Sometimes it's as far away as Florida. So we can kind of learn about loon life cycles that way by watching individually banded birds. So our research, a lot of our research is about environmental pollutants and how that affects loons and threatens their nesting success. There are lots of other things that affect loons. And I don't know if you can see this whole list, but some things on there are climate change, human disturbance, wake boat disturbance, fishing line entanglement, shoreline development. A lot of these have a strong human component. And a lot of them, we are trying to gather as much information as we can about how these things impact loons at the population level. Some of them, like climate change, are very big and feel very hard for us to understand how we as individuals can do something about them. But the one that I want to talk to you about today is loon deaths from lead poisoning, which we consider to be a 100% preventable death. So lead fishing tackle and the way loons ingest and process lead in fishing tackle is quickly becoming a leading cause of death of loons everywhere. In New Hampshire, Maine, they're seeing a lot of the same things. But it's also one that, again, with education and with a change in how we view lead tackle and what kind of products we use, can be reversed. So before I get into loons and lead, I'm going to be a little nerdy about lead in general, because the more I look into this issue, the more I learn. You know, I grew up knowing I should not eat lead paint. But other than that, I didn't know a whole lot about the history of lead in human society, so hopefully you think it's interesting. So we do know from archaeological evidence that humans have been mining lead since at least 2000 BCE in places like Sardinia and Carthage and Athens. And we also know from the evidence that humans knew lead was toxic since at least 2000 BCE, but we continue to use it. We also have archaeological evidence that people were using lead in fishing tackle since at least 2000 BCE. And then famously, the Roman Empire used lead in enormous amounts. They used it in their lead pipes to pipe in the water in the aqueducts. They also used it in the makeup that they put on their faces directly on their skin. And they used it in the vessels where they prepared and served food. And some historians actually credit a population-level lead poisoning event as part of the reason the Roman Empire fell. So, up for debate, but some people feel very strongly that the entire civilization was suffering from lead poisoning. In the United States, the first lead mines opened in Virginia in the 1600s, and in 1842 is the first time we kind of understood lead to be a disease that affects wildlife and wild birds. In 1842, I don't know if I said that. And just a little bit about lead in the natural environment. If it is left alone where it occurs naturally, it's immobile. From everything we can tell, it does no harm or no harm. It's just there. It is once lead starts to be mined and processed so that it becomes toxic. So once it is disturbed, that's when it can become toxic to biological organisms. And it can, if it is discarded, it can stay stable in the environment for up to 300 years, which means that if you toss it out in the woods, lead ammunition, just saying, anything that comes into contact with it can still suffer from lead poisoning, from just ingesting it or contact with it, and it can also continue to affect groundwater and soil. In 1980, just for a little perspective, the US was using lead at a rate of 1.3 million tons a year, which is a rate of dependence that is 10 times higher than the Romans. So we were real into lead then. And then as recently as June 2024, in a paper published on PLOS ONE, researchers looked at 16 critical pollutants, environmental pollutants, and identified lead as by far the one that is still the most dangerous and causes up to 1.7 million deaths a year. So it is still something for us to grapple with. The reasons that lead is so dangerous for living things is because lead ions, once you ingest lead, or if it comes in contact with your skin or you inhale it, lead ions pass freely through all membranes in your body. So it doesn't just affect one system or one organ, it moves throughout your body and actually impacts every single thing going on inside. It's a positively charged molecule that binds with negative molecules, including proteins, and changes the way those proteins function. So symptoms of lead poisoning are incredibly wide-ranging and can differ by person, and they accumulate in your body. As lead accumulates in your body, the symptoms get more acute and worse. But it affects everything from reproductive health to lung function to brain function to digestive disorders. It really can impact you in all these different ways. It also impacts smaller bodies quicker and at a higher, it's more toxic for smaller bodies than larger ones. So this is why lead poisoning in children is such a problem. And when we talk about other animals also, if a smaller bodied animal is ingesting lead, it's going to have a quicker impact on it than something larger. And inhaling lead, so for instance, lead tackle, lead is a soft metal. Anglers are always telling me how they put it in their mouths and pinch open the sinkers and pinch them closed, and I did that as a kid too. And I'm trying to tell them that's probably not a great idea because it is a soft metal, so it's very easy that if you're putting it in your mouth, you're going to ingest parts of it, but also just handling it because it is so soft, the dust that gets on your hands can be absorbed if you touch your face or inhale it. You are not meant to read this slide, so please don't try. But I just wanted to kind of give, hopefully, a little bit of an impact for how much legislation has occurred to curb the use of lead in the United States. Largely since the 1970s is when most of them kind of came into being. And it has worked. Lead toxicity and prevalence of lead poisoning, especially in American children, has drastically been reduced. So legislation works. Legislation to control how lead is toxic to wildlife is still kind of in process. 1991 was the first time legislation was passed that was limiting the use of lead shot for waterfowl hunting. And then in 2000, New Hampshire became the first state to ban certain sizes and types of lead fishing tackle. 2004, New York banned lead sinkers of a ½ ounce or less, but we don't think that's quite enough. So how do loons ingest lead? We know that this happens, but we have learned that this is actually not the primary way loons ingest lead anymore. We used to think that the primary way loons ingested lead was by scooping up stones. We know that they scoop up stones in the bottom of the lake and they swallow those stones. The stones go to their gizzard, which helps in digestion. So the gizzard is a really strong muscular part of a bird's stomach. It's where anything they swallow goes first, and there's muscles and digestive enzymes that begin the digestion process. So we know that loons sometimes will scoop up stones that go to the gizzard and help grind up the food. So we thought sinkers that are discarded in the bottom of the lake, probably hard to tell from stones. This maybe is the way that loons are ingesting lead. We do know it happens. This is a social media post from a wildlife sanctuary in Maine from June 2024, where they found a dead loon, they did a necropsy, and they found a single very tiny lead sinker in its body and found that it had died of lead poisoning. So we do know that this happens, and the lead sinker was amongst all these stones. However, what we are finding is that it's actually larger tackle that is impacting loon deaths in the Adirondacks. And we know this because when we find dead loons, we send them to DEC to do a necropsy. They also do x-rays to see what's inside there before they start cutting things open. And the fishing tackle that we're seeing is actually larger fish hooks, specifically the jig head hooks that have a lead weight soldered to the top of the hook itself. And these are the types of fishing tackle that we're seeing in the loons that have are declared dead by lead poisoning here in the Adirondacks. So we believe that loons are ingesting this size lead tackle because they are swallowing fish that have the tackle still attached to them. So loons are opportunistic, and we know that they will chase fish as they're being reeled in by anglers, and much to the dismay of anglers, sometimes take the fish right off the line. But we also know that there's often fish that will break the line, and they swim around the lake. They still have tackle attached to them. A fish with tackle attached to it is going to be easier for a loon to catch because it is compromised already. And so we believe that this is actually the primary way that loons are ingesting lead in the Adirondacks. And this is why we think banning half-ounce sinkers is not quite enough. We are still collecting research in the Adirondacks, about lead and loons. But what we are finding very closely mirrors what New Hampshire has already published on. They have found that loon deaths by lead directly rise with the number of anglers out on the lakes. So again, just supports our idea that loons are ingesting lead because there's more fishing activity and there's more fishing tackle and more fish with tackle attached at the same time. And they are also finding that lead is quickly becoming the #1 cause of death of loons, even amongst natural causes of death. So symptoms of lead poisoning in loon, it's not great, it's not pleasant. Once a loon ingests lead tackle, it will start to show symptoms and die within 2 to 4 weeks. And it's pretty terrible the whole time. They will exhibit some just general abnormal behavior. They seem to kind of lose their sense of, they kind of seem out of it, for a better way to say it. They lose their sense of fear of humans. They tend to swim towards shallow water, and we think that's because they're losing muscle function, so they go to shallow water. And we know that if you walk up to a loon that you think is suffering from lead poisoning, it probably won't react at all. And that's a bad thing. They become listless and lethargic. They will often beach themselves. Again, as they're getting weaker, they just can't keep themselves afloat. We have seen loons that died of lead poisoning who can't keep their heads above water and actually risk drowning. And they have tremors, gasping, and general muscle paralysis. So it's not great. Anytime we respond to a loon that is suffering from lead poisoning, we have had to euthanize it. There is no way to save a loon once it is exhibiting the symptoms of lead poisoning. So some of the things that we are doing at the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation, we are sponsoring a lead buyback program. So we have about 33 tackle shops so far in the Adirondacks participating. And if anglers take any of their lead tackle into one of these tackle shops, they can turn it in and they'll get a $10 voucher to buy lead-free tackle. So this is working. We're just trying to get the word out there so that people know that this program exists. But we also know that it's probably not enough. And we also acknowledge that there are drawbacks to switching to lead-free tackle. There are lots of lead-free options. Tungsten is a #1, is kind of the big one. And currently, lead-free options are more expensive than the lead options. This is why lead is a desirable product for fishing. So we want to acknowledge that we know that it's not perfect, but we also know that it's very bad for wildlife and for human health as well. So what we think it will need to take for real change is change in legislation to help restrict certain size lead tackle in shops, and then for companies to stop producing those lead products in the first place. So some other ways that we are working on this is we try to use our education and communication efforts to promote behavior change, just to encourage people to make the decision themselves, a personal decision for themselves about making that switch. And then we are getting more into advocacy and working with advocacy organizations for how we can try to get a some lead-free legislation. So why does the death of a single adult breeding loon matter to us? I said earlier that loons are a long-lived species, but they're also a slow-to-reproduce species. So just a couple of numbers. Loons typically don't begin breeding until they are 6 years old, so they have to survive 6 years before they are sexually mature and before they can start to even begin to try to find a mate and a territory. If a loon successfully breeds for 24 years, it typically only will produce 12 chicks over those 24 years. And out of those 12 chicks, only 5 will survive to be age 3. And out of those 5, only 3 or 4 will survive to breeding age themselves, so the age of 6. So the death of a single adult loon, a single adult breeding loon, can have a ripple effect further down the line in the population. And we are, right now in the Adirondacks, we think there's about 2,000 to 3,000 loons, and we think that's a pretty stable population. But some of our research is showing some decreased chick mortality, some things that we're concerned about for that overall population. So anything that impacts loons, such as lead poisoning, which again we think is an easy one because it can be preventable, is a concern to us. So I hope that wasn't too much of a downer before lunch. But we are a small nonprofit, so we always want to thank all of the donors and the grants that fund all of our work. And we get a lot of in-kind support from our partner organizations. We do have the Adirondack Loon Center is at our main office in Saranac Lake. We have exhibits. We're getting new exhibits very soon here in a couple weeks that we would love to have people come see. We also have a gift shop where anything you can imagine, we will sell you with a loon on it. So thank you very much. I can answer questions now, or if you want, we have a table in the back, my colleague Hannah and I, where you're free to come back and ask us questions back there. We also printed off some of our research summaries about our climate change research, our mercury research, and our nesting success research. If you'd like to take those with you, those have some kind of deeper information in them. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience and the fact that we ran over, but lunch is ready. It is buffet style, so feel free to get up and help yourself out in the hallway to the right and sit back down here and enjoy some time off from looking at me. We'll see you back here in a little bit.